Hello, Mr. Cruz.
Hey Kenya, how are you today?
I'm good. I just want to let you know you're a big head on a big screen.
I will stop the video for you guys. Nobody wants to see that.
Texting you a picture of it right now.
I feel it's a courtesy to let people. Hi, Judy. We were just saying good things about you. Were your ears burning?
She's on mute.
No, they were not burning, so.
But we were. We had all good things to say about you.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, there's no way I could check, so I have to believe you.
I'll report back, Judy, don't worry.
Very happy to be here.
All right, everyone, it's 10 o'clock. We're going to stay on time today and start our second nuclear work group meeting.
Let's go back 5 seconds.
5 seconds, right. We'll first go into a roll call just for the record. The meeting is being recorded. We have a few etiquette reminders for everyone. This is a hybrid meeting. It's been posted online as a public meeting. We do have some public observers attending. The recordings will be made available online. The transcripts will be used for the final report that's due December 1st. And we will post all materials on the work group webpage. If you're online, please remain muted and either raise your hand or place a comment in the chat. Please be mindful, we have 2 hours together and some material to cover. So if you do speak, please move the conversation forward. Be respectful of everyone's perspective and time. We appreciate those that have traveled here from places in Kentucky and out of state today to attend this meeting. And we're assembled to complete very specific tasks as outlined in Senate Joint Resolution 79. With us today in the room, we'll just go around the room first, and then we'll go online to the work group members. So Linda.
Linda Bridwell with the Executive Director with the Public Service Commission.
Chris Perry, Kentucky Electric Cooperative.
Jeff Harmon with the Senate President's Office and Senator Carroll.
Victor Barra, Nuclear Innovation Alliance.
I'm Aaron Patrick with the PPL Corporation, Louisville Gas and Electric and Kentucky Utilities. Patrick Keel, Duke Energy.
Chris Nolan with Duke Energy.
Amy Boldman, Kentucky Conservation Committee.
And then DuPont Ewing, Executive Director, Kentucky Municipal Utilities Association.
All right, online, if we could go through, you, as we call your organization, if you'll please unmute and state your name just for the record. UK Center for Applied Energy Research.
Rodney Andrews.
And Rodney, I hope you're feeling better.
I'm getting there.
AEP Kentucky Power.
Joe Yeagler.
Thank you, Joe. Annette is here. Kentucky Industrial Utility Customers.
Carl Kurz, Executive Director.
Good to see you, Carl, or hear you at least.
Yeah, good to see you all too.
TVA.
Scott Honeywell.
Good to hear you, Scott. The U.S. Nuclear Industry Council.
Todd Abergiano.
Thanks, Todd, for attending today.
You bet.
Kara Colton could not be with us today from Energy Communities Alliance, so I just wanted to make note of that. But we will be following up with Kara after this meeting. Idaho National Laboratory.
That'd be me, Christine King, Director of GAIN.
I saw you, Christine. I was just gonna say, is Christine here, but I thought it would be more official for you.
Oh, you're so nice.
Four Rivers Nuclear.
Hey, Corey Hicks is here.
And good to hear you, Corey.
Thank you.
East Kentucky Power Cooperative.
David Cruz filling in for Don Mosher.
Big Rivers Electric Cooperative.
Jason Burden in place of Nathan Berry.
Nuclear Energy Institute. I think I saw Christine.
Good morning, Christine Cheese-Medea here.
Senator Carroll. Senator Webb. Representative Rudy.
I'm here.
Representative Gordon.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you all for attending today. We're going to get started following up from our meeting 2 months ago. A little bit review of the agenda today. We have 2 hours today. We'll do a few, and we've already done the introduction, so we don't need 15 minutes, but we'll save some time there. We'll turn it over to Victor with Nuclear Innovation Alliance, and we'll talk about his interviews that he had with each of you last month, where we talked about your barriers, your concerns, potential solution sets that you recommended moving forward. And then we'll review what I'm calling a consensus statement for the work group on our position as it relates to our work this summer and for the report that's due in December. We'll also briefly talk about some identified solution sets, but know that the solution sets we've identified are by far not comprehensive, and some of those will be work products we'll work on this next month and for our working session in September. And then we're pleased to have with us Mayor Casper from the Idaho Line Commission and April Webb from Virginia's
Nuclear Energy Consortium.
It's a lot to remember.
Yes.
They will talk to us about their lessons learned as they have had their own work groups and experiences, and give us some ideas about how we want to approach the permanent work group here in Kentucky that can best meet our needs. And then we'll wrap up today's session with some to-do items moving into August and what that looks like. And we will go ahead and set the date for September. That will be an in-person working session, a long session in September where we will work more in depth on the solution sets and also our recommendations in the framework for the permanent nuclear body for the state of Kentucky. Jenna. Just to recap, Victor and I had some long discussions about the interviews, and it was apparent everyone is very excited about this topic. So much so that they want to deep dive into, all right, how do we really get this going? Let's, how can we do some projects? And that's all great. But we're here to do what's specified in Senate Joint Resolution 79. And just to repeat what that is. Identify current barriers for deployment. I would like to note the last work group session, the work group stated that, rather than, as Judy, my friend Judy would say, rather than dwelling in the land of barriers, how do we talk about barriers in a way that can be solution sets and opportunities? So how do we kind of think about how do we work on overcoming the issues, and what are those solution sets that we could recommend to the permanent work group? It also specifies develop the recommendations for how a permanent nuclear energy organization could address these barriers, and that's what we're here to do. We're also have a deadline of December 1st for our report from the work group activities, detailing all of our work group activities, but also providing recommendations for the creation of a permanent nuclear energy. It says commission, but I'm going to say either authority or organization in state government. So that these are our tasks. It's easy to want to kind of figure it out this summer, but we're here to work toward the specific task outlined in the joint resolution. Our proposed work group schedule, research and homework in August. We will send you a straw man, a draft of some language. We will ask each of your organizations to take that back and help us make this draft more robust and prepared for the report in December. September will be our working session based on that homework you'll do in August. And October, we have a potential additional fourth meeting if we need it by resolution. As Jeff knows, we're required to meet 3 times. But the way we've done the schedule is we have some flexibility. If we need a fourth meeting, we can do that, and that may be a completely online meeting in October. In November, we'll take all of your recommendations and feedback and edits back, and we will start on the report that's due. And November will be our editing review time, so that we can see that in December. So at this time, I get to stop talking and get turned over to Victor. So Victor, we're going to do a little bit of refresher just because Annette wasn't with us last time. And just to kind of ground ourselves in the discussion that's ahead of us. So Victor, I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Feel free to scroll to the next slide. Thank you all for being here today. For those that are meeting for the first time, my name is Victor Ibarra. I'm with the Nuclear Innovation Alliance, and my background is in nuclear engineering and doing a variety of activities for my boss, Judy, who's also on the line and helping me out with this project. So we're going to start with the refresher because I had a lot of good one-on-one dialogue with each and every one of you about what you thought about the potential for nuclear energy in the Commonwealth and how we can address some of these barriers and identify opportunities for us to work on moving forward in the future. But Kenya and I thought it'd be very, very good to talk a little bit about why we're here in the first place, what's going on. And I think the DOE lift-up report that we shared with you as homework assignment for this working group kind of lays that out very effectively and eloquently. There's been a lot of federal momentum in terms of trying to advance clean energy technologies, including advanced or new nuclear energy technologies. If you look at the IIJA, CHIPS Plus Act, and also the Inflation Reduction Act, there is a lot of legislation encouraging clean energy deployment from all levels of suites of technology. But the reason why we're here is because of the opportunity that nuclear can play here in California. So I'm not sure if you want to zoom in a little bit or anything kind of for folks on the back, specifically me who's not wearing my glasses. But there is a lot of opportunity that nuclear can give the Commonwealth in terms of being a clean energy source, being a firm energy source, being very effective in how it manages land, including the amount of transmission that's necessary to host new nuclear projects and existing nuclear projects. But the biggest problem, and one of the barriers that we discussed and we'll touch more in depth in later, is advanced nuclear currently is not cost competitive today. And the question that this report investigated is how can we move forward in an all of government approach, which is the federal government, the state government, and local governments to move forward with the problem that is trying to deploy a suite of technologies, including advanced nuclear, at a pace that can address climate objectives and also energy security objectives, while also doing this in a way that's sustainable, including clean jobs, etc. I see a small comment in the chat, but we can not just go on that now.
Thank you, Representative Rudy. I'll follow up with Representative Bridges. That seems like it's a Zoom technical issue, maybe on his side. So thanks for the comment, but I'll be sure to follow up with Representative Bridges.
Thank you. So this chart puts it very nicely in terms of what are some of the primary incentives towards trying to investigate and deploy advanced nuclear, new nuclear technologies, and also what is the biggest problem that we have to fix today. So if we can scroll down to the next slide, this provides a broad overview of how nuclear compares to other suites of technology in terms of the economic benefits it can provide and some of the high quality jobs that it gives. A very funny story that I have when I was in college is that I did an co-op opportunity where I was able to intern at the convention peak nuclear power plants. I worked one RF-19, which was their 19th refuel cycle for their PWR reactor. I only worked there for 6 months and I made more money than my dad did that year, which is quite a statement to make, but it really shows how specialized these jobs are, but also how high paying they are in the sense that if you work in the nuclear power plant sector, it can provide a large amount of economic opportunity for the community and even the localized area that it's sited in. So as we see here, nuclear can provide the most amount of permanent jobs per site. It can also provide a high medium wage salary, and the benefits are primarily concentrated in local communities. And that's something that we're thinking about and talking about as we move towards this clean energy deployment, because we want to make sure that it's done in a just and sustainable way, where if we are moving away towards certain technology generation types, we make sure that we also acknowledge, good morning, senators. We also acknowledge that we have to take care of the people and the communities that are sited around these locations.
I'd just like to acknowledge Senator Carroll's here. Thank you for joining us.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. We're just getting started. We've done introductions, gone through an agenda, and we're doing a little bit of refresher. So thank you. Anything else?
No, we're going to keep scrolling. But a very interesting thing that the DOE Advanced Nuclear Lifetime Report found was that if we want to deploy new nuclear and we want to make sure that it addresses our climate objectives and our clean energy security objectives, we must do it in a way that's not just sustainable for making sure that it helps in the job transition, it helps folks' lights stay on, but also do it in a way where once we need the energy that these new nuclear projects can produce, we do it in a way or fashion where we're meeting adequate build out of these new nuclear projects. The supply chain question is very sensitive. So what is really urgent at the moment right now is that as we have this moment in the clean energy transition where we're investigating new nuclear, we think about doing it in a way where we can sustainably and adequately build out new nuclear projects with the supply chain necessary for those suite of technologies. Although new nuclear may be similar to existing light water reactor technologies that exist around the United States, which we have soon to be 94 operating nuclear reactors, there will also be a new suite of technologies that will require us to develop a completely new supply chain, whether that's high temperature gas reactors, salt reactors that require different components that may be than traditional from light water reactors. So that's one question that this report investigated. So it's one thing to consider as we move forward. Next slide, please, Kenya. Another question that we got from the one-on-one interviews that we hosted with the group was the economic feasibility of new nuclear. One of the biggest questions that we get is why will new nuclear, advanced nuclear be different? I am very realistic in the sense that until someone proves otherwise, I can only say that from our understanding, it's very difficult to do economics of building large 1 gigawatt size reactors versus 300 megawatt size reactors. But there are a lot of lessons learned that we can take from the Vogtle project and what happened in Georgia in terms of making sure that those lessons learned are applied to any new nuclear builds and any new clean energy projects that we want to deploy at this scale. So this little chart is a simple visualization of what we are trying to do with new advanced nuclear technology. And it shows that there are a few things that we can do that make a lot of sense once you look at it, but it's just as simple as making sure that the design is finalized whenever you are trying to build and construct your reactor, which is what some utility members are doing right now. One example I can point to is that the TVA, Ontario Power Generation, and Synthos Green Energy Group in Poland are all part of a design finalization consortium where they are all put in capital to make sure that the BWX 300 from GE Hitachi receives or reaches a certain design maturity before it reaches the deployment stage. I will also note that this development consortium is not the same as what some have been discussing or describing as a utility deployment consortium. This is completely different in the sense that they're only providing capital to make sure that this design is finalized. And once that design is finalized, there's still so much work to do in terms of making sure that the construction plan and that is to be put in place can be finalized to make sure that this reactor technology can deploy in a timeline that makes sense and at a price point that can make sense. So that's just one example that we have here on the slide deck, but the other is making sure that you also take advantage of learning by doing. Every first of a kind reactor or every first of a kind project will always cost more the first time you do it. You're going to learn so many things as you go along. And that's part of what this report was describing earlier, where you have to make sure that you build out an order book to make sure that you take advantage of learning by doing. You can't learn by doing by only building one new nuclear reactor at the same time once every 5 years. You got to do, you have to build 5 to 10 of a type to make sure that you can take advantage of learning by doing and standardize this type of reactor design to take advantage of cost reductions and then move forward with new deployment at a levelized cost of electricity that makes sense. So that's kind of the key question of what we're trying to do in terms of addressing some of the financial concerns that we have with new nuclear projects, not just here in the Commonwealth, but all over the United States, because mega projects are very big problem here in terms of making sure that they reach deployment at the time that they're supposed to, and also at the price that they're supposed to.
I will say, we're fortunate here in Kentucky that we have a window of time. And where it is good in some ways not to be a first mover, because we're learning from projects in the early stages, such as TVA's Clinch River project, the Kimmer project. So I particularly am excited about the fact that we have an opportunity to really take the best from what's happening in the first of a kind and position the state in a way that we can work in the supply chain development, the modularization, community benefits planning, fuel cycle, so that we can position our state and our utilities in a way that we have the planning cycle in place in order to get to the nth of a kind deployment here in Kentucky. So I particularly enjoyed the liftoff report. We thought it was good just to go through a refresher, just to kind of ground us while we're here. We're not going to build one overnight or even in the next 5 years, but we can position Kentucky in a way that we can take advantage of the full economic benefits that advanced nuclear could offer our state and our citizens. So anything else, Victor?
No, but I think you are touching definitely on the last slide that we had on this.
Victor and I work so well together. So here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So to add just a little bit to what Ken just said, Kentucky is not necessarily going to be building a reactor in the next year or two. And I think what we want to communicate right now between Kenya and I to the working group members here in person and online is that there's so much work to do to getting nuclear, to getting Kentucky in a place where if it wants to move forward with nuclear energy in the state, it can do so. We want to make sure that we walk before we run with this working group in terms of making sure that we follow Senate Joint Resolution 79, to identify the barriers and the opportunities for them this permanent organization can start addressing now. So if we do decide to move forward with nuclear in the Commonwealth, we are setting up the recommendations in place to make sure that we can do this as effectively and orderly as possible in the coming years. So nuclear can take, or excuse me, Kentucky can take advantage of these potential nth of a kind reactors that may be coming online by the time Kentucky is ready for this deployment of new nuclear to meet its either clean energy goals or energy security goals moving forward. So that's our quick recap.
That's our quick recap, just to ground us today in our conversation, because a lot of the benefits and challenges presented in the commercial liftoff report were echoed in the interviews with each of the work group members this past month. And we're going to dive right into what we heard from the work group and how we intend to move forward. And then we'll have a brief discussion just to make sure that we have heard you correctly and we're documenting the major concerns and starting to map out a plan forward for our recommendations in the permanent nuclear body in the state of Kentucky. So just to, before I turn it back over to Victor, just to review, Senate Joint Resolution identified a category of barriers that we each discussed with you in our interviews, from regulatory, statutory, financial, social, environmental, workforce, and educational related. We had some very good discussions with each of the work group members, providing valuable perspectives from each of their organizations. I'm going to turn it over to Victor, because he really did the bulk of the work. This is by far a chart that we created, but it's it's not exhaustive in terms of some of the deep dive things that came out in each of the conversations across the work group members. So Victor, if you want to kind of go through what we heard during our interviews and conversations.
Yeah, like Kenya was saying, this is not exhaustive of every little detail that was discussed on my one-on-one calls that I had with one of you. But I think that's okay because we want to make sure that we broadly understand what we heard from these one-on-one discussions and communicate them back to you right now to make sure that we're not missing anything that that was discussed and heard on these one-on-one calls. So to summarize, what we discussed on those one-on-one calls was not anything new that we had heard. You know, one of the
So that was reassuring. Just say that that of all the studies that we read and reports, what we heard from you all are echoed in what has been written about in terms of existing barriers to advanced nuclear deployment. I think that's reassuring, and it means that we have a place that we can build from. And that we're not alone in this journey either, that we also can learn because these barriers exist across all states and across, well, globally too. And so we're in a great position that we can have recommendations in each of these categories, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel because a lot of the solution sets have already been identified. It's just really about how do we approach deployment here in the state of Kentucky. So Victor, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Kenya. Very well said. To summarize what was discussed or identified in our one-on-one calls, examples from the regulatory sector include the licensing and the permitting of these new nuclear projects, whether it's a facility that will ultimately be a power production facility, or if Kentucky sees itself being part of a different part of the nuclear cycle, whether it's the front end of the fuel cycle or the back end of the fuel cycle. Being in a place where it's engagement with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or any other state body, whether it's the Public Service Commission, et cetera, it can do so in an orderly and an effective fashion. That was one thing that was brought up a lot during our discussions, and that is something that I put down on the slide. There are other regulatory approvals that we also have to be aware of, and other local ordinances that may come up if we do decide to move forward with nuclear deployment in the Commonwealth. But those are just examples of what we discussed from the regulatory region. Another area that we identified was Senate Bill 4. Others, or some, I would say it was a 50-50 split between what working group members perceive as Senate Bill 4 to be, whether it was a barrier or a non-barrier. But I would just like to communicate that we are taking into account every working group member's perspective, and if even just one person brought up Senate Bill 4, I would feel very comfortable putting it on here so we can all discuss it as a group moving forward, so we can finalize our consensus statement and move forward with how we want to address some of these perceived barriers. On the financial side, we've already talked a little bit about the economics of new nuclear, but what was very worrisome from the one-on-one conversations that I had, or the perceptions from the one-on-one conversation that I had, was that folks were very worried about the construction timelines, making sure that if we build a project, it doesn't reach the status that past builds have reached in terms of saying it can come online within 7 years, but then it takes double that, 15 plus years to reach deployment. The financing mechanisms associated with nuclear projects, these are billion plus dollar projects, and that is not capital that utilities and other organizations have easy access to. These are mega projects and they're going to cost a lot of money. So how can we position the Commonwealth in a way where it can either take advantage of existing programs at the state level or maybe federal programs through the Department of Energy Loan Programs Office or something else, where it can finance these new nuclear projects in a way that reduces the risk associated with these large mega projects. Another concern was site identification. That was a idea that was brought up from several working group members about whether or not this working group moving forward can set up a permanent organization where it can then ultimately commission a site identification study. But those studies also require capital and will require millions of dollars to do so. So making sure that if we want to do something like that for the Commonwealth, we understand the cost associated with that, and also the giving the permanent organization the feasibility to move it moving forward. Another concern was academic funding. Program or starting university programs from scratch, or high school programs, or even community colleges programs from scratch will require money. Not sure if you want me to keep going or.
No, well, Christine, as a work group member, I see your hand is raised, so jump right in.
I had a question on the concerns that you heard around site identification and was wondering if we could go back to that for just a moment, Victor. There's a lot of different ways to approach site identification and kind of ease into that instead of doing full-blown siting evaluations with licensing. Was there any gradation offered in the conversations you had on doing that type of analysis?
So I'll jump in, Christine, is I do think the term site identification is a spectrum, as we've talked about. It was everything from economic impact to specific areas, if there's a site identified, such as, you know, we've seen at some of the coal to nuclear feasibilities. It was technical site identification. It was it's a term that I think it means something different to whoever's talking about site identification. And we've experienced that in our conversation. So I do think there's a lot of room in site identification for one, education and outreach on what's already been done. But then also what we talked about, that gap analysis of, okay, well then what are the unique characteristics here in Kentucky that haven't touched on, if that's where you're going, Christine.
Well, I think it's just an idea of potentially being careful with the language and maybe using language like screening and qualification and certification, all of those meaning, or licensing, all of those meaning different things and different dollar values. Yeah, I do think eventually part of it, what was in my mind there, is in that screening part, how we bring in the unique characteristics of Kentucky into the early parts of the screening, such that you're investing the dollars wisely early on.
I think that's a very, very good point. Thank you for bringing that up, Christine. I think especially as we do begin the report writing, Kenya, and all the working group members here as well, that language is going to be very, very important as we move forward, because site identification, that is a spectrum of what we can do, but being more specific about some of these actions that we want to tackle, I think is very important. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you.
Social,
yes,
just think about social.
Yeah, there's a lot on social and there's a lot on environments. From the social topics that we discussed, there's the perception of safety and how these new nuclear facilities, whether it's a power production facility or anything else associated with the nuclear cycle, might perform. You know, one of the biggest barriers, in my opinion, to nuclear deployment is that it's very difficult to get people in a room where they can actually see a nuclear facility operating. You know, typically they're located in very rural areas, hard to get from if you're in a metropolitan area, and typically require getting into a mindset where you walk into a place where, you know, there's a lot of armed guards, etc. But one of the biggest things that we can do moving forward is point folks to potential safety studies associated with new nuclear production facilities, the existing safety aspects of current operating light water reactors here in the United States, and build off on that safety culture that already exists here in the US to help them move forward and try to address some of their concerns with the perception of safety for these new nuclear reactors. There's also cultural acceptance of new nuclear. One of the biggest things that was discussed also on my one-on-one calls with individuals in this room and online was the history of the Commonwealth in terms of the importance it's played in national security as being host to a military site, being host to the Paducah facility, being host to the Maxi Flats facility, etc. All of that is very, very important. And once you pair it in with the history of coal generation in the state, it's important to understand that as we move forward with investigating whether or not new nuclear is something that Kentucky would like to move forward with, because we want to make sure that we address some of the concerns that historically folks might have towards certain types of technology and educate them about what some are the potential opportunities with new nuclear as it begins to be discussed as an opportunity here in the Commonwealth.
Also, I just would like to remind everyone online in the work group that the Office of Energy Policy is fuel neutral, so we work in coal, natural gas, renewables, and we're doing our work in nuclear. We support work in all of those areas, whether it be coal with carbon capture, whether it be natural gas, whether it be our energy security work and our work in fuel diversity. This work group really isn't here to determine if nuclear is in our future or to say yes or no, but the work group is here to say, shouldn't we at least evaluate opportunities here in the state? If we are a all of the above fuel state, we can see nuclear on par with coal carbon capture, with natural gas carbon capture, with renewables and long duration storage when we're talking about firm, clean, low carbon resources. So just wanted to anchor that in this sensitivities around talking about nuclear, and that we're not choosing nuclear over coal, nuclear over gas, but we're saying, shouldn't it be a discussion and at least evaluating it in the context of all of those technologies? It just so happens though that some decommissioned coal sites do provide opportunities for infrastructure deployment in terms of advanced nuclear, and that's a conversation we'll do as well. I spoke of perceptions of energy security, and of course, on the social side, the need for educational workforce deployment. The other big issue, which Victor's going to elaborate on, that we heard from, is really on the environmental side in terms of waste management. So, Victor, I'll turn it back to you.
I can start that shortly. Christine, I did see your hand raised shortly, but I'm not sure if Kenya maybe said what you might have wanted to say.
I'll make it short. And Victor, you know, I have a passion about this. When you go to the writing phase, and discussing how you're going to engage socially, typically when we say educate about nuclear, it's a one-way conversation, and I don't think that's what Kentucky's trying to create. So when we talk about, you know, you can help people learn about the technology, but there's still at some point a two-way conversation and listening that needs to happen. So the educate word in nuclear sometimes has negative connotation.
Which is why, Christine, I'm going to appreciate your comments on the reviews. As well as all the work group comments when we get into the writing and the report development. So Victor, if you'll go move into environmental.
Yeah, Very good comment. Thank you so much, Kristen. As we move a little bit into the environmental aspects that we discussed, low-level waste and high-level waste were high areas of concern for the working group members. Historically, we are aware of some of the management associated with the Maxi Flats sites in East Kentucky. And because of that, we want to make sure that as we move forward, we address some of the concerns associated with the management of the Maxi Flats site, but also any new nuclear generated waste within the Commonwealth and how we're going to manage that moving forward. Another topic that was discussed was akin to the site identification barrier, but the seismic conditions that may exist in certain areas or regions of Kentucky and the feasibility of a new nuclear facility being located in this area. Would just like to comment that under the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, any new nuclear facility that would be sited would undergo rigorous seismic feasibility studies and ensure that the seismic conditions in place would be adequate for the safe operation of a new nuclear facility. But that is something that was brought up on our one-on-one conversations. The last one is water consumption. People are worried about how a new nuclear facility being sited potentially near a water source would affect some of the quality of either the water or affect the wildlife in the area. And that is something that we want to make sure that we address as we move forward with this conversation as well. And as already stated, the historic waste management associated with the Maxi Flat sites. And that's kind of a quasi-social and environmental barrier. Moving forward, we also have workforce discussion topics. People laid out multiple areas where we need to discuss moving forward, but the hiring of electricians, the hiring of construction workers, the hiring of nuclear technologists, and potential retraining programs for either co-workforce or military members that may want to transition into the nuclear sector. These are all considerations that we have to make sure that we address moving forward. And then finally, on the education aspect, there is no existing nuclear engineering program in the Commonwealth. And that is something that we are all very aware of and that is considered by many to be a barrier for any new nuclear consideration in Kentucky. That's a summary of very broadly what we discussed on our one-on-one calls and
Anything that we've missed?
exactly.
So now the opportunity, do you think that we've hit the major high points? Go ahead, Chris.
So Victor, I thought it was an excellent presentation and well laid out. If I were gonna look at this grouping as a whole, I would make a couple of changes to it
Okay.
or additions. So under education, I think it's very important to talk about nuclear programming from the state. But if you look at the time frame of this technological development and deployment, K through 12 should be in there too. You need to encourage the students to want to go into those fields. This K through 12 are going to be.
Yeah.
When I look at environmental, I see waste mentioned 3 times. I think you could have one bullet that is comprehensive on waste. I know it's an important and emotional issue, but I don't know if we need to carry it up to times. And citing is not under environmental, it's under financial. I'm wondering if the financial aspect, getting back to what Christine was talking about, is really an economic development impact, how different parts of the state could be impacted. And environmental is really how you would do site selection. You do site screening.
Yeah.
The way you do it is you use publicly available information to limiting high seismic areas or areas that don't have water. And then that leaves areas that you can go study in more detail.
Yeah.
I think the comment on citing those probably is like, justice issue, that's being cited.
So environmental doesn't have economic justice, environmental justice. That might be a miss.
Yeah.
the one thing that the complex thought that doesn't show up is that, you know, the difference between fossil plants and nuclear plants is that fossil plants, most of the money is in the fuel, and that fuel leaves the community. And nuclear plants, most of the cost is in the equipment and people, and that stays in the community in terms of labor dollars and tax dollars. But there's secondary benefits as well. And so in Kentucky, as a coal producing state, there's secondary benefits for burning coal in Kentucky because you get a benefit twice. But if Paducah was the facility that provided the enriched uranium for the industry, then the secondary benefit for the state as well. And somehow looking at the benefits to the state in terms of attracting development and leveraging the development that exists and a strategy that had Paducah as part of it. That doesn't show up in the dynamic. And maybe under financials, primary and secondary, you know, economic factors.
Absolutely. That is a very good point. Thank you.
Can you do, and, you know, I'm thinking of this.
Speak up a little.
No, I was thinking about education. You know, there's gonna be some backlash to from communities from under education, we probably need to have a wider scope of education in terms of community outreach, in terms of
Community engagement.
and folks here at the table. I always think it's best to get everybody at the table as opposed to bringing them in at the end. So you've got to get environmental groups involved in the discussion, although they might slow things down. Getting everybody at the table in the beginning is always the best idea.
And I think that goes back to your point, Christine, under education, having the two-way rather than one-way education.
Absolutely, and I think it, you know, we need to make sure that we create a forum of equity so that there's no, not to pick on my utility friends in the room, but this needs to be a conversation where you have equal partners in the conversation and identifying local leaders in those conversations. So
Right.
I think, you know, also being cautious of coming in at a state level, even though I'm pretty sure everybody in Kentucky knows you can, yeah.
So what we'll do, thanks for that feedback. I would like to introduce Senator Webb here as vice president. And I would like to introduce, I'm sorry, I was remiss. Stephen Barrera is our new employee here at the Office of Energy Policy. So Stephen will be working with Victor and I as we go back and listen to the transcripts and work on this chart to get it in a better position for the final report conclusion for December. But with that, I'm cognizant of time. We'll continue to work on this and send it out for your feedback, and Chris for your feedback, and hopefully we can get this in a way that's oh, Corey, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Corey. Yeah, come on in. And Judy, I see your comment as well. I agree with Christine, foster two-way communication. Go ahead, Corey.
I had two really quick things. I appreciate what the gentleman said about the Paducah site. And, you know, I think that building out our workforce is definitely important. I do think we can utilize the workforce that we already have and some familiarity there. So building that out is you know, a two-lane road there.
All right. Sorry, Corey, your audio's a little troublesome, so I'm gonna give you some time to fix your audio. We'll come back to you. I saw David, your hand was up, Mr. Cruz.
It was, and I know my video was troublesome as well, but you know, one of the things, and education may not be the right word, but I don't think that education needs to be just limited to discussions about nuclear, because I think one of the things we've got to overcome is why do we need some I'll say conventional in the sense that dispatchable resources. So I think there needs to be, part of the discussion has got to be about why the system, why the transmission system and the system as a whole needs some dispatchable resources to, from a technical perspective, to help buoy up the
David,
system.
David, could I phrase that in a way of the need to educate on a system that has firm resources?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And Corey, I can go back to you
Yeah,
now.
can I try that again? Is this better?
Yes, much better.
Okay. I think that the nuclear workers at the DOE site, we're not starting at ground zero. We do need to continue to build out that program so that we can have educated workers to work on this. But just wanted to remind folks about the nuclear workers that have experience working in nuclear is certainly something that benefits our state. The other thing that has happened, since the last time that we met is the Department of Energy awarded a reindustrialization grant to the Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce, the Paducah Chamber of Commerce, is in the process of pulling together a subcontractor to go and implement that grant. And it's really to look at the reindustrialization of the DOE site as well as workforce needs. So I mentioned that because I think that complements many of the things that we're talking about here, and we can leverage what they're doing to, benefit the entire state.
Thanks for bringing that up, Corey. I had forgotten to include that in our slide deck. So that reindustrialization grant will be so beneficial for Paducah to re-envision how it may or may not see itself in a nuclear ecosystem. So thanks, Corey, for reminding me about that. And we'll be sure to include that in the report as well as an example.
If I could add something to education, got 2 energy degrees, and I think there's not enough emphasis on energy overall. And if you want to attract a student or retrain a minor or whatever, you have to, I think, if you're interested in energy, you're interested in energy across the board. So, I've got an energy degree. My emphasis was underground coal mine and production. Well, just to have those programmatic options and make sure the industry served as a whole. And the most flexible institutions right now, KCTCS does a great job in tailoring curriculum, and they're pretty good about being able to flip it pretty quick pertaining to the needs of, ours is on our industrial site at home. We did that for a reason, for their flexibility and flip curriculum based on the need of who we attract or who we might be trying to get. And I think we've got to start getting interest in the students. We lose them, about the 6th grade, I think, really, in middle school even. So you've got to provide an option, energy umbrella option, and then ask the industry what they need specifically in the areas we're developing. And I think KCTCS is in the best place for immediate response, and then maybe later get the regional institutions on board too.
Yeah, I want to reinforce that because I'm hearing similar conversations in the solar industry, same problem. So workforce development.
You bring up energy, whether I was interested in all energy, and that includes the grid. And I think the grid is we've got to address that too.
And that goes back to David's comment of educating on firm resources, what that means, the grid, how it works, and circling all the way back to Chris Nolan's comment, K through 12 education across the board. All right, Corey, your hand is still up. Is that because you have something else, or you just forgot to take your hand down? I think you forgot to take his hand down. All right, so we've got some work to do. Thank you all for your time and your interviews, and we will go back and Victor and we'll work on this chart.
Kenya?
Yes, hey Mike, yeah.
I'm sorry, this is Mike Kurtz, and I don't see where the hand raised thing is. On the financial mechanisms, financing issues, does that include the securitization concept that I sent around a month ago
Yes,
or so?
so we did make note of that, Mike, and I think you'll see that when we start the report and we start deep diving into solution sets. I think that's where we have an opportunity to kind of make these brief bullets a little bit more robust in terms of the report recommendations, but we did make note of that, Mike, on the securitization.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry for cutting in.
No, you're fine. That's what we're here for. We also wanted to acknowledge that there are some external factors that are playing into this conversation as well. My good friend, Dr. Matthews, always said, it all depends on the price of natural gas. And so we can't not look at the influence that the natural gas and renewable market behaviors have on this conversation. Geopolitical events, of course, as the utilities are well aware, and our communities, the federal incentives that are currently being deployed across the entire energy landscape. What's happening with EPA that will affect decisions in terms of carbon regulation at our industrial and utilities. We've seen a lot of corporate sustainability goals, and David, I see your hand too. Policies of the RTOs, and then of course the stresses that our recent frequent events have had on our grid system, the December event, our flooding, our tornado events, the derecho winds, all of that, and the importance to have that fuel diversity, flexibility, and certain resources. Go ahead, David. I saw your hand.
I'm coming. So, you know, I have a little bit of nuclear experience in my history, and one of the things we need to look at with regard to siting and think about on the front end is the security requirements at a nuclear plant have gone up exponentially since 9/11 and other things, and so that's not and the nuclear plants were struggling with how to handle that expense and the staff required for security, because today it's a lot different than it was just 20 years, 20 or 30 years ago. So I'll go back to lowering my hand and muting myself.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cruz. We made note of that comment. We'll make note of that too in the chart. So as we move on, since we're approaching, we want to make sure we get into our presenters.
15 minutes.
Again, framing questions not to be answered today, but as we move forward next month and into September, when we really start the wording, the report writing, the development. What should the primary objective be for adding nuclear to our energy mix? Can these challenges be presented as opportunities? And what would success look like in Kentucky? And so I think number 3 is really important. And what does success look like for us? I'm always one for kind of putting some things out there for feedback. We worked on what we would call a potential consensus statement here for the work group based on all of these interviews, based on what we heard. And this by far is not final, but it's something we will ask you to work on in terms of homework. So I'm just going to read it aloud for the record. Kentucky's economic position globally and the well-being of its citizens is dependent upon safe, reliable, and resilient power that provides price stability and cost competitiveness while protecting our environmental and natural resources. The decision of whether or not to pursue nuclear economic development in Kentucky is complex, with intentional and effective community engagement and community support a central threshold for development. There are a number of well-documented factors that the state will need to consider. And we've talked about these: cost, external influences, safety, regulatory processes, workforce, public perception, environmental impact. However, if Kentucky is able to overcome the barriers to advance nuclear economic development, identify and deploy solution sets, it could have a significant impact on the state's energy and economic future. And my quotation is backwards down there. So, based on our conversations, based on what we've heard today, this is as best I could distill down why we're here and what we're working towards. Thoughts on a consensus statement for the work group, just as initial thought. You all will have this later to kind of massage and work on. Rare, that's rare.
You got it perfect.
I don't think so, but I think it's a balance.
Yeah.
But it's also important for our final report that the work group have a statement of the complexity around it. Knowing that it's part of an all of the above resource mix and yes, go ahead. I knew it. If I gave you some time, I knew.
So I don't have a comment on the statement. I think it's very good. But I think embedded in the statement is a philosophy of comparing least cost to best value. Because a least cost is a decision right now. And a best value is a decision of the next generation. And so when I look at energy security, when I look at environmental impacts, when I look at jobs and economic development, when I look at the courts and federal policy that restrict access to the existing fossil fuel mix that we have available, when I look at an overall system, best value is a future statement, least cost is a here and now. Okay. And so really, to get to that consensus statement for everyone to come away with a similar meaning, we kind of got to get a foundation on least cost versus best.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna play devil's advocate. I mean, it's hard to quantify some of those tenant because, I mean, to me, you know, I did citing is me on the things to consider. I think it's important. But you can't really quantify the value sometimes of natural resources, not just monetary. And I think it'll make that clear of impact, public health, safety, and the natural resource side. So it's not just about money. It's about, and some of those other things are really hard to quantify for me. Probably outweigh them.
So Chris, going back to that, I liked your comment. Thank you, Senator Webb, citing public health and safety being, we can incorporate that. How do you think we can get that foundation, that we said that grounding and least cost versus value?
Well, the slide right before that had a couple of key questions.
Yeah.
And I think what we need to do is like, what should be the primary objective for adding nuclear to our energy mix? Why would you do it? And I think, you know, someone mentioned about the system and the behavior of the system. Well, as you reduce your exposure to coal and gas, nuclear becomes crucial because it's the only thing that makes the system up, especially severe weather events, either cold or. And so I think, and companies are going to want to build near nuclear because we get inquiries because they believe they can sell their product for more if they can say it's clean.
Right.
So like Nucor Steel will say, if I can sell clean steel cheaper than China, I have the market. Right. So they have a price point they have to stay under, but they believe they can charge more for their product. If you look at Dow's interest in building a nuclear power plant in Texas, they believe they can sell their product for more if they can make it clean. And so, you know, you asked a question, what could we do? You know, Maryland did a study on the Warrior One plan and its retirement and the economic impact of the community, state. That was a specific case study, but it's a template of what you could do to try and answer some of those questions on best value. Now,
So,
there
so
is a-
Chris, that could be a work product for like the permanent nuclear work stuff, okay. But we could
But I
reference,
think we have to identify the building blocks, how do you create them, because I don't think everyone is gonna come to the same. I mean, I've been working on this for 4 years, so obviously there's certain things that I take as givens that I had to learn.
is this this is a start.
Can you, before we move on,
Go ahead.
can I add one
Yeah,
more
go
thing?
ahead.
Because I really liked your statement, but I think we almost need to take one step back, and I don't know how you add it in, but part of our efforts right now are to make sure that Kentucky is positioned to not have the decision made for them.
Okay,
And that's just, you know, so much of this is intertwined with federal energy policy.
so that we still have our role and our decision making.
Yes, but whatever the decision is, that it's a deliberate decision by Kentuckians and not being made for them.
I think that's an important point.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean.
No, especially given what's happening on the regulatory side.
Yes.
One other quick statement to consider is in any statement that we put out, just as a general statement of fact, I guess, so when the public reads anything, there's an overall understanding that there are several technologies available now. And, you know, in our statements that we're looking at the technologies that would be more suitable for whatever situation we encounter in Kentucky, whether that be a coal-fired plant or what X Energy is doing with Dow, you know, all the technologies that are out there. And I think every message that we send out has to acknowledge that, because I think that's the one thing that the public has no idea about. And that really came home the other night when we did there were a couple of folks on the KT show with Renee Shaw, and they were really pushing wind and solar. They really had no concept of where nuclear is right now. And those were people that were activists within the energy community. And they were still talking back 20, 30 years ago. Statements.
So if I heard you, Senator Carroll, correctly, maybe adding in just the Kentucky approach is inclusive of all technologies that can meet our needs. Okay.
On the second paragraph, Kenya, where we say including the cost, I think we need to say cost benefit, because as this gentleman said, the cost of nuclear will be more than coal until it's an established processed product. And it can't compete with the cost of coal right now or other base load technologies. So I think maybe the future cost benefit and something that talks about we're eventually going to get there. So it's a affordable electricity, but right now, you know, it'd be hard to make the case.
Well,
benefit.
Well, and
Or future.
I do agree with that, and I think to Chris' point, I think too, and the Senator Carroll, there's a realization that when we talk about advanced nuclear now, in the context of clean firm power, you're now doing a cost comparison to a fossil with CCS, renewables with long-term duration storage, right? And then how it's not advanced nuclear against coal or natural gas without CCS. And I think that's something that we have to change your mindset about. Because when you compare it against those clean, firm technologies, then you can see advanced nuclear becomes an investment choice. And I don't know if that's what we're getting at, Chris.
So because so much of the cost of a gas plant is in the fuel, you know, as its costs stay relatively the same because the price of the fuel goes up. Because nuclear the cost is in the equipment and in the people, you know, in the Carolinas, 50% of the power Duke sells is nuclear. We have some of the lowest rates in the country. The plants weren't the lowest costing plants when they came online. They just are better investments over here. You know, Victor mentioned Comanche Peak. When Comanche Peak came online, it was the single most expensive unit ever built. I think it was $11 billion. It's competitive to that. So the tough decisions today reap benefits over time because it's an 80-year investment. It's just hard to make that initial decision when a company has to meet.
Or if you're like a cooperative.
But I think cooperatives have a longer range vision than publicly traded utilities. I mean, we have cooperatives as partners. In fact, one of our nuclear power plants, we own 20% of it. 80% is owned by cooperatives. So they're great partners and they have a opportunity.
All right, well, moving forward, I see Mayor Casper here in April. Just wanted to recap. Here's what my first bullet is: what does success look like in Kentucky? That we actually have capacity and a committed organization that leads these nuclear economic development discussions. To me, that's a success if we can build that capacity. Some of the things we talked about, you know, the public and worker protection, Senator Webb, a supportive legislative environment, regulatory processes around cost, risk, and benefits, which is sort of Linda's wheelhouse there. For us in the energy office, and what Chris has said, electricity that is affordable in the long term. Our manufacturing and economical competitiveness that we remain at, protecting of our resources, and infrastructure that remains reliable and resilient, high-paying and skilled jobs across manufacturing, fuel supply, and generation, and workforce training and education programs. To me, I like to say, what does success look like? And I don't know, Chris, if this is what you're getting at, but starting to articulate that. A lot of things involve success, and it's not just do we get a reactor, you know, it's around this entire concept of what does it mean for the Commonwealth and those benefits in our communities. So with that, we will send this out just so we can get to Mayor Casper in April. Based on all of this, potential responsibilities of a permanent nuclear development energy organization in the state. We categorize these, but we will be asking you and working in September at our working meeting how do we do this? How do we streamline? How do we attract investment? Building that skilled workforce. So this is something for you to think about. We've made it this far to here's sort of the responsibilities we envision for a permanent nuclear organization, but then also what are they going to be charged with specifically? What are some work products that we would expect of the permanent organization, such as the Maryland study or a state economic development study or a community engagement approach that's two-way? You know, how do we spell that out in a way that's meaningful for this organization? So Victor, if you want to, I'll stop sharing. If Victor, you want to introduce our guest speakers?
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully they're here. I don't see them.
They were here. I admitted them.
Perfect. Well, I can have April Wade, who is the executive director of the Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium, go first. April, we're super happy to have you here. I know you might recognize some faces from the Energy Communities Alliance event that was hosted back in Paducah a few months ago. But with that, we can give you the floor so you can talk a little bit about what VNEC is, your experiences working there the past few years, and any questions you might answer from the working group members that we have here in person or online.
All right, April, back to you. You can unmute and turn on your video.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here today. I'm sorry I can't join you guys in Kentucky. It looks like a full house there. As Victor said, my name is April Wade. I'm the Executive Director for Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium. In 2013, the General Assembly passed legislation and the governor signed that created the Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium Authority and the Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium, two different groups. The authority is ran through the state Department of Energy. The governor appoints those board members and their meetings are obviously public. My group is the working arm. It is, our membership is a paid membership. We can lobby, we can maneuver different ways. But we work closely with the authority. Our missions are the same. In fact, much of our legislation is passed is directs the authority to do the task, but then the authority puts that task on us. It's a great balance that we have. Throughout the years, we were able to pass several legislative items that have been beneficial to the industry. One thing, adding a 17th career cluster for the Department of Education. I'm not sure if you all are aware, the Department of Education here in Washington has 16 career clusters. And energy is mixed into agriculture, manufacturing, STEM. But here in Virginia, we added a 17th that focuses on energy, and my organization led that effort. We're also the only state that has a strategic plan for the industry, and that was passed by legislation as well. Every 4 years, we supply that to the state, and it gives us kind of a roadmap of where we need to be going. Going back a little bit here, VNEC, although the legislation passed in 2013, we really didn't get up and running until 2015, where they hired an executive director and they hired me as well, and I was heading up their communications. In 2018, that executive director retired and I took over. And right now it's just me and our lobby team. And as I mentioned, we've been able to pass several pieces of legislation that have been beneficial to the industry. One of our other projects right now is developing the Virginia Innovative Nuclear Hub. That is another group that we're putting together with a collaboration between universities and industry. This is hopefully to garner more research here in Virginia. Back in the 80s, we did have some test reactors, but they're now gone. And so we need to get back and focus more on some research because we have some great universities. And right now, here in Virginia, every governor that is elected, and in Virginia, governors are only elected for one term, so they have 4 years. They have 10 months to develop a strategic plan for energy. And every year we go into the governor's office every start of every term, they have 10 months to do an energy plan. And every governor since we've been established, we go in and talk about nuclear. And we've been lucky. We've been in a few of them and mentioned a couple sentences, but Governor Youngkin has taken it to another level this year. And he's really made nuclear energy a priority of his. It's been an amazing relationship working with the governor's office and getting more focus on the economic development opportunities and also their support for the efforts that we're putting together. I want to keep it a little short because I want to make sure I have time to answer any questions you all may have.
Yeah, April, I have a question. For a state that's beginning this discussion about, creating capacity in their state to have a permanent group work on nuclear and their focus, what kind of are lessons learned since 2015 to now that you can candidly share?
That is a great question. Lessons learned. I mean, it's been an interesting thing for us because, I can always go back and lean on our mission that the General Assembly passed. So that's been really helpful to make sure that mission has been lined out for me. For instance, we had an issue this last legislature getting some bills passed. And we had to go back to remind some of the legislators that they have been supportive of every effort we made and remind them that the law that was passed that they had passed we were following that mission. That's been something that's been, I think, crucial for us to have. Oh, and I don't think you need to overdo it on staff, but make sure you do have enough people to go out and put that mission into a plan and work that plan. And it is a big job. And you guys are starting a little differently than we did, but I mean, there's a lot of education that needs to happen, and just grow support, and reach out to your economic development department and communities, because they need to understand what the opportunity is.
Where is your authority tied, April? Is it tied to a specific government agency, or how is it? Kind of
Well,
structured?
I think the legislature has it tied to the department, or under the Commerce Secretary, but under Commerce is also the Department of Energy here in Virginia. So the Department of Energy really runs that organization, and they have a meeting quarterly. And then we also have to do a report every year to the governor and to the legislature.
Anything that you would change?
What would I change? I'm very lucky that we have I have a great board and a lot of great support. What I would change, I don't know if I would change much, but making sure that you are flexible to make decisions on the fly. For instance, right now, I mean, since Governor Youngkin has announced his support for the nuclear industry, I've grown a lot. Our membership went from 8 to 14. I know that may not sound a lot, but it is a big difference for me. There's more people I have to get okay with, more people I have to schedule meetings with. And as you all know, traveling stuff, it's not easy. But there's like some of the things, like when you're growing, make sure you have some things in place. We have to have some conversations as we are growing and how we want to look at possibly new members. Before, it was we needed every dime we could get, and all of our members were amazing. But we have a lot of new people. They're not new companies. They're not necessarily in Virginia yet, but they're interested. And I just think some of those things need to be laid out a little bit more in the beginning of how you want to grow and give you a little direction.
And April, would you mind sharing with us your latest report?
Our latest report to the governor's office.
Yeah, yes, someone in the
yeah, I can definitely do that. I believe it's a public document, so I don't think that's a problem. I'll double check that. Just so you all know, though, it was we turned that in, I think, in November of last year, so it's a few months old. We'll be doing a new one this fall, but I think the strategic plan is probably something that is I will also share with everybody if you haven't seen it. And again, the legislature passed that for us to do for them. And it does help give us a guide. And it also helps us go back to the legislature and say, you agreed to this. This is what we put in place. And this is what we're doing. And keeping going back and checking in.
What's been the greatest benefit of having your authority and consortium to Virginia, to the citizens? Like what has that provided in terms of benefits?
Well, for instance, the Economic Development Partnership here in Virginia, VDP, they didn't really look at the nuclear industry as an industry that had opportunity. We were here. They know about Dominion, they know about Framatome, BWXT, Huntington Eagles, but they didn't really look at it as opportunity. And that was something that I think really changed for us, is when the Economic Development Department started seeing us as an opportunity and looking at different ways at the industry. They've put a value statement together for the industry. I'm not going to tell you that there's still not some work to do there. We're not one of their priority areas, but they treat us pretty well right now, and really are working with us as a team to look at how we can develop more in other projects. So I'd really want to tie them in and also make sure the communities that you're looking at, you're also keeping up to date with. And education is one of the biggest things. The Nuclear Innovation Alliance has been a huge help to me this year by just educating the governor's office. It's one thing for them to say that they are supportive of nuclear or small modular reactors, but I don't think they really completely understood what that all meant. And we've come in and have done a lot of education with them and what the advanced reactor, small modular reactor, fuel, the NRC licensing process. So really take the time to educate those in the community that you need to.
And April, I think we have a question from Christine King. So go ahead, Christine.
Hi, April. It's nice to see you.
Hi.
I was wondering, and especially given all the folks that are on this call and in this room, what is the thinking associated with beyond your state boundaries and how you discuss that at a state level and the regional opportunities that are emerging in Appalachia? Or is that beyond your mission?
No, not at all. In fact, I have reached out to West Virginia, and I think you'll see us reach out to more. Honestly, I think we're all in this and we're all trying to go for the same goals. So I think it's best that we all work together. As I tell my board, I mean, if we're all, if we're all swimming together, we're going to be successful. If we don't, we're going to hurt each other. So I want to be a resource to the other states if we can, and work with them on issues that we we can do that together. It just makes sense.
All right, well, thank you, April. We've got Mayor Casper here as well. I hope you don't mind if we can reach out to you for that offer to work across state lines and learn from your experiences.
Most definitely. I hope you guys do reach out. I think it'll be a good partnership.
All right, thank you, April. We'll chat soon. And all right.
Thanks.
Awesome, thank you, April.
Thank
And then
you.
now we have Mayor Casper. She is serving currently as mayor of Idaho Falls, Idaho, which, if many of you know, is a nuclear hub of sorts with the Idaho National Lab being also located in the area. Mayor Casper, very happy to have you here. Please take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that this is an informal conversation. I was worried last night that I didn't have a PowerPoint, so I'm glad that we're just being conversational here. I will tell you that a lot of what I'm going to talk about, you can find documentation if you go to line.idaho.gov, and that's line, L-I-N-E. But I have served on Idaho's Line Commission since fall of 2013, actually longer than I've served in my role as mayor of the city of Idaho Falls. LINE stands for Leadership in Nuclear Energy, and it represents a very different model than what April has described. And so I'm going to be giving you a different perspective on another way that you might organize at the state level. To give you a brief overview of LINE, the LINE Commission is a statewide commission. The members are appointed by the governor, and this is technically it's managed out of his office. The commissioners are not paid, but we're fed lunch when we have meetings. And if there are, extreme lodging costs, I think that they will pick up the lodging costs for some meetings. But most appointees participate at the expense of whatever institution they're representing. Originally, the LINE Commission had staff support from the State Department of Commerce. And then it kind of morphed a little bit, and it was the Office of the Lieutenant Governor that provided some support. INL, Idaho National Laboratory, has also always had sort of a shadow role in helping to formulate the agendas and helping provide staff backup as well. Right now, I think primarily the staffing comes from INL working with a couple of individuals in the governor's office. The line has no formal role in policymaking, but informally, the commission is able to receive information and make recommendations to the administration. Right now, the cycle is that we meet 3 times annually. We meet in late January, which we have a part-time legislature that typically runs from January to March, April, May, whenever they end their session. And so by having that meeting in January, we get the benefit of being, in the Capitol as the legislature is getting underway. And there's some benefit there to being there. We also have several members that are legislators or affiliated with, government. Therefore, it's helpful to meet where they are in January. We also meet in May after the legislative session is over, late May usually. And that meeting is almost always held in Idaho Falls. The January meeting will be held in our state capitol. The meeting in late January is held in Idaho Falls, a good, 4-hour drive away. But this is where Idaho National Laboratory has its in-town headquarters. And often when we have the meetings there, it will include some element of a tour. So it'll be a 2-day, right? One day we'll be touring, the next day will be a meeting. And there are lots of different sites that can be toured at the lab. And so it's usually has that educational component to it. The third meeting, typically in the falls, October-ish, is a meeting where it'll be held, it roves around the state. And they usually will pick an area that maybe hasn't had much awareness of the laboratory or much interaction with the nuclear industry. And there's almost an ambassadorial sort of feeling to that meeting where we'll take a part of the state that isn't connected to the industry in some way and either create connections or address concerns. An example of creating a connection, the laboratory right now has a cybersecurity role from Homeland Security. When it's a mission, a cybersecurity mission. When we went to the Panhandle of Idaho and held a meeting, can't remember which city now, it might have been Coeur d'Alene or anyway, one of those cities, we talked a lot about, or maybe it was Moscow, Idaho, which is home to the University of Idaho. But anyway, we talked a lot about cyber training, cyber workforce issues and programs, and we were open to helping to facilitate the development of cyber training programs that even whether somebody in that community was pro or con when it came to nuclear, they were certainly pro when it came to training up the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. And so it again, in sort of that ambassadorial sort of way, it created positive connections. An example of a meeting where there might have been concerns in the city of Twin Falls. They often are worried about the aquifer that the Idaho National Laboratory sits atop the aquifer there, and they worry about water quality being impacted by things that have happened at the site and the environmental cleanup issues. And so to be able to be there in that community might be less trying to develop goodwill for a training program and more trying to make sure that we hit those educational components that about groundwater that people are concerned about. So anyway, that's a little too much background.
Mayor,
Yeah.
Can I, since we're having a conversation, what's advice you would give in terms of lessons learned?
Yeah, no, I'll go straight to that. I had some of that. So I have several thoughts here. One would be, I would absolutely encourage that you do something statewide. And the fact that we're affiliated with government serves as an aid to keeping elected officials accountable. And the commission has been around longer than many elected officials have. And so it's that permanence that you often don't have when you have government, but it has that freshness that's associated with having lay people be a part of the committee. So excellent intentions can really go off track sometimes due to political circumstances. And by having the permanence of the Line Commission, it ensures that large and public, groups of, it ensures that we're kept a little bit on track as a state when it comes to our nuclear policy. The forum is invaluable for showcasing progress and highlighting needs. I would also say that if you had a forum like this, don't be afraid to use it for addressing challenges as well. I've been convinced over and over again that the wisdom of crowds can be very significant, especially when some of the members are these highly informed individuals that are members of the administration. I jumped over some things I was going to explain about the membership of line, but I will say that at the beginning, we are in line 3.0 right now. The very first line commission was a small group of about 14 individuals, very select, and they were asked to just take a look back in 2012 of where the state is with respect to its cleanup progress and its nuclear mission. Those recommendations became the substance of line 2.0. And that's when I joined the organization in 2013. And then line 3.0 came about when a new governor came in. And now we have about double that many members. And it includes the lieutenant governor, it includes the attorney general, the director of the Idaho Department of Commerce, usually somebody from environmental quality, the lab director, the representatives from all three universities. There's a requirement for a mayor, a requirement for a county commissioner, a requirement for 2 senators, 2 members of the House of Representatives, let's see, a member of the tribes, people from DOE. I mean, so it's actually a much larger group than it used to be. And you might be saying, well, this sounds awfully symbolic. They can't really perform. But if you have the right people in the room, that prestige can be there that will allow just about anything that the Line Commission does to feel like some progress. It's provided, like I said, an invaluable forum for highlighting the value of this economic sector to the state. There have been pockets in the past before Line. The value of the nuclear industry was really relegated to people in Eastern Idaho who were somewhere in the vicinity of the laboratory. And now that we've been able to have a decade of the Line Commission and taking it on the road, so to speak, when we've had meetings, we now have pockets of support all over the state. And it's not just a regional thing anymore. So it's helped to highlight the value of this economic sector. It's also provided a forum for statewide leaders and members of Congress to come and to visit and express their support. At one point, we held a joint meeting with where we invited our governor and the governor of Utah, and we had a Line Commission that focused on the mutual goals of these 2 states, particularly with respect to the small modular reactor that we're working on, the NuScale model. We've provided our own governor with political backup when he's needed it. We have been helpful in the past in helping to ensure that legislation passes. We haven't been terribly successful yet. And it's not that we haven't, it's not that we've tried, but it's just been slow to come about. But creating a dialogue in the state about having state portfolio standards or state, goals with respect to nuclear energy. And part of that is just that Idaho is a tough state to have a climate change type conversation in. And so it's one thing to be pro-industry, pro-nuclear. It's another thing to try to translate that into some policy. And so that kind of conversation is a little slower to come about. But we've been able to accomplish a lot with respect to highlighting what we needed to in order to position us to have the right press releases coming out of the governor's office. And so it's a political tool, but it's been a very effective one.
Any questions for Mayor Casper? Mayor Casper, do you guys do an annual report?
No, I would say that our minutes and the various, PowerPoints that are presented in each meeting are what you're going to find as being the primary output. The very first Line Commission did have a very comprehensive report. I would recommend the executive summary of that to you. We are established by executive order, and so we're not legislative. We're definitely just a little showpiece of the governor or of the the administration, but it has, as I said, proven to be a really effective way of keeping this issue alive and giving it credibility in the eyes of folks throughout the state. So we've achieved the goals we set out to, but we're not a paid membership organization in any way, and so we're limited in those ways.
So you said you're not paid, you don't have a budget per se, it's just.
Not really, no. I think the governor's office will pay for those photocopies and, room rental charges and lunch, and that's about it. So it's very much driven by content, and that content is often delivered by the laboratory itself. And so we pretty much at this point, I mean, I have so much more information I could share, but I don't want to read to you or bore you and take more time. But right now, our charter is to monitor and provide counsel on implementation of recommendations, that with respect to energy, track and assess the activities of the U.S. Congress, identify and recommend appropriate preemptive or preparatory actions relative to looming federal budget and policy decisions that could have implications for INL operations, provide a means or mechanism to enable a continued robust and open dialogue with the public. I mean, it's these noble aspirations. But we're there to make sure that Idaho National Laboratory and its missions are successful.
Well, thank you, Mayor Casper, for joining us and your perspective. And also thank you for coming when I saw you in Paducah. Thank you for coming down to Paducah as well.
Kenya, you do good work. So you guys, good hands.
Will you mind if we reach out to you, or if any of our members would like to reach out to you just to have some follow-up conversations?
No problem whatsoever. When nuclear advances, we all win, in my opinion.
All right, well, those are the great final words. Thank you, Mayor Casper.
Best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're gonna go back to our PowerPoint, if I can find it. All right. So we're nearing our time together. So expectations moving forward. It's a lot to digest. We'll get some follow-up information from April and Mayor Casper. If you want to go through Victor and talk about where we're going over the next few months.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to tie it back in, I think it's important we realize what was laid out for the objectives that are expected by Senate Joint Resolution 79. The first task was identifying barriers. That's what we did in June with our one-on-one conversations. July, Kenya and I spent a lot of time meeting with each other and discussing what I had heard. We're here today in July, and as we move forward, we really want to make sure we start addressing the next objectives under Senate Joint Resolution 79, which is making those potential recommendations and brainstorming and working together as a working group to make sure that we can provide that final report before December 1st, the day that it's due. So in August, we're gonna research on existing working and commission structures in other states. And this is why we thought it'd be great to invite Mayor Casper and April Wade from the Idaho Line Commission and the Virginia Nuclear Commission respectively, so you can get an idea and feel for how different states have approached this task and what we can do potentially moving forward here. So we're going to be providing you a homework assignment where Kenya showed very briefly before the virtual presentations from Mayor Casper and April Wade. If you would like this permanent organization to be focused on creating public trust and addressing social and environmental barriers in the Commonwealth, well, what is the best way to do that? That's kind of where we want to be the rest of this month and into August. In September, we have already laid out the third working group meeting. We will have it on September 6th, Kenya.
It'll be September 6th here. It'll be on the first floor in our training room. We will be having lunch. We'll have lunch. We'll start and it'll be around a half day, and if we need to, we'll have the working lunch, but that will be the bulk of our feedback and work. We'll be refining what we heard today and some of the graphics and charts. And then we'll also be really having an in-depth working meeting on structure, mission, what are our recommendations, of potential solution sets that we can move forward for our December report.
There's nowhere else I'd rather be on my birthday.
So we're definitely have. So yeah, I'm gonna make a note, have a birthday cake, she cake. Yeah, so that's an added bonus. October is our goal,
Yes.
if we need it, to actually, go back in for our report. And do some refinement. November will be editing and finalization with the work group. And Senator Carroll, since Senator Webb, Senator Carroll, Representative Rudy, and Representative Gordon, and Representative Bridges, since you all will be reading this, are there expectations you have? Like advice you would, or things you would like to see when it comes to December, other than what you outlined in the Senate resolution?
You know, I have a lot of things to say, you know, when we started this process, we sought out Virginia. We had a couple of meetings with them. We sought out Idaho. We talked about those two different models. We really didn't feel comfortable with either one for our situation. Virginia is so much further along than we are. So that's why this group was created. And, you know, when we did that, the urgency was just to get a commission established and to use this group to really set the parameters for what that group would need to address. And that's the main priority when we drafted the legislation. And so that's a good start. Since we've done that, I feel a renewed urgency in all of this. And do I think we need to be careful our approach with this, the all of the above approach with renewables, coal, gas? I do. We got to be careful about that, because I'm telling you, we are going to get left behind if we don't step up and if we don't do it with some urgency. And I'm not saying we have to build 50 nuclear reactors in our state. We've got to get the process in place. We've got for the utility companies, for everyone involved in this industry, we've got to get all of it in place. And then those decisions can be made, how fast we move and how many reactors and what industry we get. But we can't just fumble through this and this just be something that we set up. It's just an empty shell of just saying we're doing it. We have got to move forward with this. Every time I go somewhere, and we just got back from Iowa a few weeks ago, when I talk to representatives from other states, millions of dollars they're investing in this. And it may have been an article, Kenya, that you sent out where one state is looking at the X-energy reactors, buying so many of them. We got to move on this. We can't fumble around with this. My hope, what we can come out with as far as the product from this group, is 2 or 3 pieces of legislation that's going to move us some substantial steps forward. Not just kind of just sit there and learn for a couple of years, but I want some legislation that's going to actually be meaningful in this process to get us where we need to be. But again, I do want to be sensitive to poll, but we've got to get the foundation, we've got to get everything in place. So if we really, there is an urgency to step up and move quickly and get reactors here because of something maybe happening in DC. Like you said, we're prepared to do that. But if we don't, we are going to get behind this. These other states are doing that, and they're putting their checkbooks behind it. And that's a battle that we're going to have as far as budget. And I'm willing to fight that battle to get some money into this commission to really to make sure that we are moving the commission. So we're here to help. And I feel a sense that there's a lot more support within the legislature. There's still some doubt. Robin Maxey Flatt experience, she has concerns about that. And it's valid that the more we get legislators exposed to the next generation technologies, the more comfortable I see them get. Suzanne Miles with the Idaho with us. You know, her attitude, I think she gets it now. And that's the battle that we're fighting, but we need, it needs to be a quickly fought battle and not just reactive, but we've got to be very proactive with everything we do. And we've got to think about, I had a couple of people approach us in Paducah that are nuclear companies. They're already making contacts, and already looking at it. So, we need to be prepared for that. If that's the next step and the reactor comes quickly, it might be that we need to really step up educational efforts in those particular areas, those communities. So those, just an urgency is kind of the overall field that I want you all to understand from my perspective that I feel like we need to do.
I agree with Danny on the budget side. There's got to be money. There's money, and I think the executive branch can help us when there were initial recommendations, and then we can certainly do our magic. But I think budget on education and potential about, incentive or whatever the case may be, look to other states and try to get a framework and establish a fund or something like that, along with putting money into education. And as we grow, I think one of the takes that I took from our speakers today was, you have to focus on your mission. And if you need to keep that defined as you go and you grow, I think that is something that the legislature is going to have a hand in too. Who knows when we sit in our chairs in a couple of years even. So I think we need to keep it well set and narrow and the mission as we expand, and let that be a fluid kind of thing, but yet make sure we have enough agency guidance and legislative guidance to get where we want to go in the time frame, Senator Carroll mentioned.
So just to clarify, are you all thinking that the first step is to establish some sort of authority and funding, and then, we're looking at the next legislative session where you want to dig into barriers or, attracting this sort of investment, or are you all thinking that needs to be done?
I think we need to get a clearer understanding of what are the various pathways that are going to lead us to nuclear. And we need to be prepared for all possibilities. And again, the companies that are already looking at such a located reactor, we need to address that too. If that's something that we need to do this next session, and while we're setting up a commission, we need to look at that. I don't want just setting up the commission to get in the way to slow anything down by any means, but I'm still learning a lot of this. And let's say a company does come in and they contact one of the energy producers, a coal-fired plant that's been decommissioned, and they want a partner and they want to put a small modular reactor there as the power source. What are the barriers to that? Because that may very well be the first reactor that we see, like Wyoming's doing. That may be the first one. It may not be TVA that comes in with an SMR down in Paducah. But we need to be prepared for those possibilities. My hope is that this group we can vet out those various pathways, and then if there's legislation that we need to address this next session to make sure we don't slow anything down, that we do that. But it's all a learning process. I don't know what I don't know, and I spend more time on this than most of the legislators. There's 2 or 3 that are really getting the bug on this and really getting deep on it. So it's just, that's what I hope we could use all of this expertise for you all to tell us where can we get where we need to be, and how can we have contingency plans for each one of these pathways, and that we're moving forward in each pathway as we go from reactors to the entire nuclear support industry, making sure we're ready for that. Every meeting I have with this, every place I go, I get more and more fascinated, the deeper I get. It's just enthralling to me to learn about this, the possibilities. I don't want to state this out.
We have budget every year. Our budget session. We are blessed now to have a rainy day fund through NGE, and I said, this might qualify for NGE at some point in my area because people have what they're having to pay for electricity. And now I think is the time to move in and educate my constituents, and especially East Kentucky, about where we are, because people can't afford electric. And it's really hindering development, and people are having to make some hard decisions. So I think it's urgent to me in that regard, as far as accessibility and costs for my people. But we just do this budget thing every 2 years. Now, you know, I'm not saying the executive branch can't call a special session when we all have a consensus on what we're doing, or that they couldn't do it on an NGE, but we don't know what the rainy day fund's gonna hold. So I think it is urgent to go ahead and establish a framework. I mean, we can even create a fund and then put money in it later, but I think it needs to be dealt with because it is urgent for my people. In 3 years, my people paying for power now.
Robin, I don't think it's just that for Eastern Kentucky. The more I learn, X Energy, think about the possibilities of, you know, Eastern Kentucky doesn't have the infrastructure really for major industry. What if they have their own power source on site? Think about the possibilities that could open up for Eastern Kentucky in unemployment and just rejuvenating that entire region. So again, the more I learn, the more I think about what are the possibilities that would be unique to our state, some of these technologies that we can bring here. And again, I know in Eastern Kentucky, with coal, I get it, but you know, at some point,
People are, we're gonna have people employed at this rate because everybody having to move. That's and we don't want depopulation, any more depopulation of that. My area.
Depopulation raises rates.
Yeah. And it makes them harder on the carrier. I mean, it's a vicious circle. I mean, the providers, whether it's water, power, whatever it is, you know, you've got to provide the same infrastructure to a lot less people. And you know, I feel for the utilities, but it's going to get worse before it gets better.
So with that, this next month, Baker and I have been doing some brainstorming on what we've heard and our work in Paducah and that conference and where we are. So I'm a big believer in sending something out and then feedback. Chaos, in my opinion, chaos is sticky notes and white paper. So I prefer to send something out and you all say this is wrong, here's my version of it, or this is what I think. But keep in mind, I think a very important distinction that Senator Carroll made is there are things a permanent organization can work on. And then there may be things that are more immediate that maybe we need while the work group is moving. So try to think about what I'm calling these solution sets, things to work on, the to-do list. Try to think about your to-do list in terms of, all right, I need somebody to work on this over the next 3 to 5 years. And you put them in that bucket. Oh, well, my company's having a conversation right now, and this may be something we need to work on. While this group, you see where I'm going, Patrick. I don't think there's going to be very many to-do lists outside of what I think a permanent work group, but if there are, we need to bring that to the September meeting and have language that we can look at for September meeting. So next week, you will get what I call a straw man proposal. And really it's just a brainstorm draft to get you saying, no, I don't like that. I think it's this, here's what I would do. And then we'll bring all that back in September for our working session where we will talk about, okay, framework, mission, to Senator Webb's point. What is the mission? How is it crafted? What do we want them to do? focus areas. What abilities will this group have? We saw abilities in Virginia that are very different than the abilities in the commission in Idaho. So think about that. And then also, are there immediate things we need to address in the short term? Any questions? And I'm good. With that, feel free to contact myself, Victor, or even Stephen. We're happy to have any conversations with you individually or together, and I'll meet with you in the interim as we kind of talk through these issues. Anything from the online before we close out? Christine, I see your face and you've got your fist up to your face. Christine's good. All right, Corey, go ahead. I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. I was listening to some of the back and forth about, a permanent nuclear authority, and I think that is a great approach. But one thing that I would urge us to keep in mind is the industry. When Virginia was talking, they had kind of an industry approach that they had certain mechanisms they could do, and then a state approach, they had certain mechanisms that they could use. And I think that two-pronged approach is something that is very valid. So as we're thinking through that, I would encourage us to look at the pros and cons on that.
And Judy, I saw you popped on.
Yeah, so can you just clarify exactly what the homework assignment is? You want people to look at the straw and then come to the next meeting prepared to comment, or you want comments ahead?
Oh, thank you, Judy. Yes, if you have comments ahead of September 6th, we will take them in advance and have those prepared and ready. I'm not going to tell someone they can't speak if they come September and they're like, I just did my comments yesterday. But I prefer to have them at least 2 weeks in advance of September 6th so that we can digest those comments and have it prepared for the September 6th working session. Anything else, Judy?
No, that was my main question. And it's 2 weeks ahead of the 6th is like August 20 something or something like that. That's when you.
I'll spell it out. We'll spell it out in the email. It'll be a due date for prior comments so that Victor and I will have time to assemble those 6. All right. Thank you all for your time, and all the meeting materials will be posted online next week for anybody that could be here today. So thank you all.
Been busy? See you later.